Welcome, dear listener to Moonlight Audiobook. I'm Julian, your host for today's mystery. There's something timeless about a good mystery, isn't there? The way it pulls us together, strangers across continents, all leaning in, hearts quiet, minds racing, as we try to piece together the puzzle. In a world that often feels loud and scattered, a mystery reminds us to slow down, to observe, to listen. I see a lot of people haven't subscribed. Please take a moment to subscribe to my channel, it means world to me. Let me know in the comments where in the world you are tuning in from. Today's mystery is the puzzle of the Velvet Hour. Now grab something, a coffee or hot chocolate, and get yourself comfortable. Let's begin. Chapter 1. A Letter Before Death. Even before Hercule Poirot set foot in Kingsbourne, he felt something was wrong. The village was picturesque, yes, nestled in green hedgerows, with copper chimneys and tea roses spilling over stone walls, but the air was not at peace. There was an edge to it, the kind Poirot had learned to recognize. Not wind, not weather, but a disturbance, like a fine mechanism slightly out of balance. He arrived just past dusk, stepping off the train in patent leather shoes that clicked on the uneven platform. A porter greeted him with polite confusion. No one was expected. And yet, someone had arranged for a car. A black Daimler with no driver in sight, only the engine ticking faintly and an envelope on the seat addressed in elegant, violet ink. To Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Private. Poirot's expression did not change, but his mind sharpened at once. In the passenger seat of the idling car, he slit the envelope with his silver pocket blade. Inside was a single card, thick as parchment and cleanly folded. The message read, Monsieur Poirot, you are being watched. Come to Marston Hall before the 7th hour tomorrow evening. Time is a weapon, and at the Velvet Hour, it strikes twice. A friend of the hour. There was no signature, but stamped across the card's bottom corner was a wax seal. A clock face, stopped at precisely 7:45, pressed into wax so dark it appeared black in the evening light. Poirot read the note twice, then looked around the empty station. Très bien, he murmured. It begins. Marston Hall stood on the northern edge of Kingsbourne, wrapped in ivy and fog. By morning, the house appeared stately yet curiously withdrawn, as though it disliked visitors, even polite ones. Poirot arrived at 9, crisp and immaculate, having prepared for a quiet breakfast only to discover that the local bakery's croissants were insulting to the profession. The butler who opened the door was pale and shaken. Monsieur Poirot, he asked. Poirot gave a slight bow. I regret to inform you, the man continued, Mr. Edgar Marston passed away last night. The doctor believes it was natural. His heart. Poirot's eyes did not blink. Natural, you say? Yes, sir. In his study. He was alone. None. He was not. Sir. Poirot's voice lowered. He was not alone. He had a visitor. A visitor armed not with a pistol, but with something far more subtle. The butler hesitated. I don't follow. Then kindly show me the study. The room was a shrine to time. Clocks of every size, style, and era filled the walls and lined the polished tables. Long case clocks with lacquered doors, brass travel clocks from Vienna, a delicate French cartel ticking no more. But that was just it. None of them ticked. Not one. They were frozen. Poirot paced the room slowly, gloved hands clasped behind his back, surveying each clock. Some had stopped at minutes past the hour, others before. But each one, whether stately or modest, bore the same time, 7:45. At the center of the room, slumped in a leather wingback chair, sat the lifeless body of Edgar Marston, horologist of renown and former advisor to the British Museum. A velvet robe in deep burgundy was drawn neatly across his chest. His expression was oddly fixed, as though something had caught him mid-thought and held him there. Poirot leaned closer. A velvet ribbon, tied loosely around the man's right wrist, glinted darkly under the lamplight. Its edge appeared to be stained with something, darker than the fabric, almost brown-black. Poirot did not touch it. He merely observed. "Did the doctor examine this?" he asked. The butler replied. He noted it but said it was decorative. Mr. Marston was eccentric. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Decorative? Ah, and poison, mon ami, that too, is often decorative. He moved to the largest clock, a bronze and walnut masterpiece encased in glass. He lifted the casing and adjusted the hands. They moved freely, not jammed, not broken. "Tell me," he said, "were these clocks all wound?" "Every morning, sir. Without fail. Mr. Marston's routine never changed." Poirot nodded. "Yet someone altered them. All at once. After his death, perhaps. But why? And why this hour, 7:45? The butler remained silent. "Who lives here?" Poirot asked quietly. "Only Miss Vera. His niece. She's upstairs." Poirot didn't turn. He was staring at a small silver timepiece on the mantel, identical to one he had seen in the Imperial Hotel in Vienna, one only gifted to master craftsmen by a now-defunct guild. "Time," Poirot said softly, "is never random. It leaves its fingerprints on everything." Vera Marston entered without knocking. She was tall and composed, dressed in morning black though her gloves were ivory. Her voice was calm, too calm for someone who had lost her only family. "So, you're the detective." "Oui, mademoiselle. Hercule Poirot, at your service." She moved past the body with only a fleeting glance, as one might regard a piece of furniture newly out of place. "My uncle died of natural causes," she said. "He was 78. It isn't shocking." Poirot gave a modest nod. "No, mademoiselle. Only inconsistent." She frowned. "With what?" "With the silence. A man whose world was clocks, and not one of them ticked when he died." A pause. "I see," she said. "And your purpose here?" Poirot smiled faintly. "To ask questions. Not about clocks, but about people. About guilt. About time." She met his eyes, cool and unreadable. "You'll find we all keep secrets, Monsieur Poirot. Some better than others." He bowed. "Bien sûr. But secrets, like clocks, cannot stay wound forever." That night, Poirot returned to his hotel. He laid out the ribbon, the wax-sealed note, and his pocket watch, ticking steadily at 7:44. "1 minute," he murmured. "That is all it takes. To lie, to kill, to stop the world." The letter had warned him, time is a weapon. And at the velvet hour, it strikes twice. Once, he thought, for Edgar Marston. And once more, for the one who killed him. Chapter 2. The Man Who Mastered Time. By midday, the village of Kingsbourne was awash in the kind of spring light that made even old stone glow. But at Marston Hall, the air remained still. Not oppressive, something subtler. As if the house were listening. Poirot returned after a brief walk through the village. He had passed 3 clocks in shop windows on the way. Each one showed a different time. A curious place, he mused aloud as he crossed the gravel drive. A town where time disagrees with itself. The front door was opened this time by a different figure. A man in his mid-30s, trim and businesslike, with sandy hair combed too precisely and shoes shined beyond reason. "Detective Poirot?" the man asked with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Daniel Leon. I manage Mr. Marston's estate." Or did. Poirot took the offered hand briefly. "And now?" Well, now I suppose I manage the aftermath. He gestured for Poirot to enter. As they walked through the corridor toward the parlor, Poirot noted the man's impeccable tailoring, the faint scent of lemon polish, and, most telling, the subtle gleam of curiosity barely masked beneath his calm. "Miss Vera asked me to make myself available to you," Leon said. "She understands there may be formalities." "Merci," Poirot replied politely. "You were close to Mr. Marston." "Close enough to know he was a man of habits. And enemies." "Enemies?" Poirot raised a brow. "That is a strong word." Leon paused, one hand resting on the back of a carved chair. "Perhaps. But in Mr. Marston's world, disagreement was a form of war. If someone contradicted him, about clocks, patents, commissions, he did not forgive." Poirot nodded slowly. "And he had many commissions?" "Oh yes, even in recent years. Royal pieces, museums, private clients across Europe. Obsessive, really." "Obsession," Poirot said, "is often the child of regret." Leon tilted his head. "Interesting. Did he ever speak to you of a name? Anna?" Leon blinked. "No. Should he have?" Poirot said nothing, but his mental file expanded. The gold locket he had glimpsed briefly in the study, engraved with a woman's name and date, would not remain silent for long. Shortly after, Poirot was shown to Mr. Marston's private workshop, a separate chamber beyond the study, connected by a narrow hallway that was locked at both ends. Vera herself produced the key. "My uncle didn't allow staff in here," she said. "Not even me." "Heiress," Poirot said softly. "We are trespassing in sacred ground." The moment the door opened, the scent of oiled brass and lacquered wood filled the air. It was a cathedral of precision. Delicate gears, half-finished timepieces, labeled trays of screws sorted by diameter, and journals, rows of them, bound in navy leather, lined the shelves like scriptures. Poirot ran a gloved finger over a small engraving tool, then examined a nearby bench. Its velvet workmat was immaculate, save for a faint brownish smear near the edge. He bent closer. "Mademoiselle," he asked without turning, "did your uncle have any assistants?" Vera hesitated. "Once. Years ago. A girl named Beatrice Wells. But they had a falling out." "May I inquire as to the nature?" "I believe she damaged a valuable piece. He dismissed her, paid her well to stay quiet." Poirot turned and met her gaze. "And yet, she did not." Vera's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" Poirot tapped the top of a work table. "This smear, it is from a restoring compound. One developed not for clocks, but for antique velvet." Vera said nothing. "Someone else has been in here. Recently. Someone working with that material." He moved to the shelves, scanning quickly until he found it. A glass vial, half full, labeled tincture number 6, diluted copper and chloride, velvet safe. The label was smudged, but legible. "And what of the clocks in the study?" he asked. "Were they restored by your uncle?" "No. Those were complete. Finished. For display." Poirot frowned slightly. "Yet someone moved them. Set them all to 7:45. Vera's voice lowered. "He had a theory. About time." "Ah," Poirot breathed. "Now we come to it." "He called it the Velvet Hour," she said. "He believed there was a moment, a single moment, when time stood still. When everything in a man's life could be seen with perfect clarity. Like a reflection in still water." Poirot nodded slowly. "And he intended to find it." "He spent years trying to build a mechanism that could. Well, he claimed it could record the emotional signature of a moment." Poirot blinked. Mais non. That is not horology. That is metaphysics. Vera gave a small, humorless smile. He was more than a clockmaker. He believed time could reveal truth, even after death. As Poirot stepped out into the garden for air, he found himself standing beside a small sundial mounted on stone. Its shadow pointed nowhere. The clouds had thickened. He heard a voice behind him. "You're him, aren't you? The one who finds things people don't want found." Poirot turned. A woman stood there, perhaps in her late 20s, with auburn hair and a cigarette pinched between two fingers. Her eyes were keen and sharp beneath a cap pulled low. "Mademoiselle?" "Wells. Beatrice Wells." Poirot said nothing, but his heart ticked faster. "I came to offer my condolences," she said casually, "and to collect what's mine." "What would that be?" "A letter. Written by Edgar. 2 weeks ago. He sent me word. Told me to come here the day after his death. Said he'd leave it in the 4th clock." Poirot blinked. "Pardon?" She pointed to the house. "There's a tall long case clock in the main study. Mahogany. Roman numerals." He said to open it. "Behind the pendulum. That's where he hid it." Poirot studied her for a long moment. "And you came alone?" "No. Someone else beat me here. But I don't think they knew what they were looking for." She took a drag from her cigarette and exhaled slowly. "You're asking yourself if I killed him, aren't you?" Poirot didn't answer. "I didn't," she said, "but I wish I had." Chapter 3. The Velvet Ribbon. Inside the drawing room of Marston Hall, the clocks had been silenced, but not the tensions. Poirot stood once more in the study where Edgar Marston had died, his eyes resting on the long case clock Beatrice Wells had described. It was tall, its surface varnished to a dull gleam, and the Roman numerals carved in bone-white ivory. He moved slowly, almost reverently, and opened the cabinet door beneath the pendulum. Behind it, taped to the wooden back panel with a strip of aged medical gauze, was a folded letter in a plain envelope. There was no name on the front. Only a time. 7:45. Poirot removed it carefully, inspecting the envelope. Inside was a single page, typewritten. "If I am dead, then it is because someone feared what I had remembered. I have lived my life by the tyranny of minutes. But 1 minute, once forgotten, returned to me like a wound that never healed. That minute is the velvet hour. To Beatrice, I know what happened. I know what I did. I am sorry for the silence. There is something hidden behind the eclipse. It contains the truth. But truth is never silent forever. Edgar." Poirot stared at the note for a long time. The eclipse. Not a metaphor. Not from Marston. It must be an object. A clock? A design? A file? He folded the paper and slipped it into a small document case inside his coat. He turned and stepped carefully back into the hallway, where Vera Marston had just emerged from the library, her arms crossed tightly. "Did you find what she wanted?" she asked. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Mademoiselle, I find only what the room is willing to confess." "I don't believe Beatrice," she said. "She blames my uncle, but she's always resented this house. And me." Poirot nodded gently. "And you, mademoiselle? Do you blame him?" Vera paused. "For what?" "For whatever moment in your life still ticks behind your eyes." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked past him, toward the study. "He didn't tell you about the fire, did he?" Poirot's head tilted. "No. It happened 15 years ago. A minor one. No one was hurt. But a part of his private records room was destroyed. He called it an accident." "Yet you suggest otherwise." Vera's voice was quiet. I think someone tried to erase something. Poirot's brows narrowed. And did he rebuild what was lost? No. He left the burned section untouched. It became symbolic. Poirot considered this, then gestured toward the sitting room. Shall we sit, mademoiselle? I think it is time we discuss the man who made clocks, and how time may have finally turned on him. They settled in the sunlit corner of the west-facing room, where dust hovered in still shafts. A housekeeper brought tea, untouched by either of them. Your uncle, Poirot began, was a man of immense precision. But such people are rarely simple. There is often a fracture beneath the surface. Did you ever see it? Vera hesitated. He was careful with words. More so with silence. Sometimes I think he believed if he could organize time perfectly, he could control memory. Memory cannot be wound, Poirot murmured. Only revisited. A pause. I think he was afraid, she said. Of whom? Of the past. And of someone who remembered it differently than he did. Poirot leaned forward. Mademoiselle, I must ask, do you recognize this? He removed the velvet ribbon from his coat pocket, sealed in a glassine envelope. It had been removed discreetly from Edgar's wrist by Poirot earlier that morning. Vera stared at it. It was deep violet, almost black in dim light. Its edges were torn, not with scissors, but frayed, as though ripped. Her voice, when she spoke, was flat. He used to tie those to finished commissions. 1 ribbon per masterpiece. Symbolic. Yes. It meant a timepiece had captured the precise emotion he intended. A perfect replica of a moment. Poirot tapped the envelope. This one, I believe, was not decorative. It carried a substance, copper-based, likely from a compound used to preserve antique fabrics. Poison. He nodded. Absorbed through the skin. Slow. Painless. Untraceable after several hours. Perfect for someone who understands restoration materials. Vera sat back, eyes distant. So, someone killed him with his own ribbon. OUI. And chose, deliberately, a piece of symbolic meaning. A murder disguised as sentiment. Later that afternoon, Poirot visited the workshop again, alone this time. There, near the back of the shelves, he found it. A clock named the eclipse, its brass dial half concealed by a sun and moon motif. A rare piece. One of a kind. He opened the back casing. Inside, wedged between the winding gear and the sound board, was a folded sketch, brittle and lined with graphite. It depicted the layout of the study, but not as it appeared now. The clock positions were different. There was an added fixture, marked AW in tiny, capital lettering. He brought the sketch into the light and studied the arrangement. AW? Anna Wells. Could it be? Or? He paused. No. Alfred Whitcomb. A name from the past. The man Marston once accused of stealing a design. A rival horologist whose career had collapsed under scandal. Was it possible that Beatrice and this Whitcomb had a connection? Had Edgar discovered something after all these years? As he returned to the house, Poirot found Daniel Leon walking briskly down the hall, coat in hand. You're leaving? Poirot asked. Leon paused. To town. Some paperwork. Is that a problem? Poirot's tone was light. Not at all. But I wonder, monsieur, where were you at 7:45 last night? Leon blinked. What? Surely you remember. It is, after all, a precise moment. The velvet hour. I was with Vera. She'll confirm it. Poirot inclined his head. Of course. I do not doubt it. I only wonder who else might. He watched Leon retreat, shoes tapping too quickly on the stone. Mon ami, Poirot murmured to himself. You are too polished. Like a clock wound too tightly. Eventually, something snaps. Chapter 4. The Circle of Inheritance. The wind moved through the treetops of Marston Hall as if whispering something unfinished. Hercule Poirot, ever precise in gait and gaze, stood before the fireplace in the great room, his fingers steepled under his chin. He did not need to pace to think. His little grey cells had been working furiously since he found the sketch inside the eclipse. And now, a circle was forming, not of time, but of inheritance. At its center was Edgar Marston. Around it, 3 points, Beatrice Wells, Vera Marston, and the enigmatic Daniel Leon. Each stood to inherit. Each had secrets. And one, perhaps, had murder in their heart. Edgar never spoke of a will, Beatrice said quietly as Poirot sat with her in the small conservatory. Her voice echoed slightly beneath the glass panels above. That is unlike a man so exacting, Poirot replied. A man who measured time but left his affairs to chance. She looked down. Maybe he never truly believed he would die. Not by someone's hand. Poirot watched her carefully. Tell me, mademoiselle, when did you last see Alfred Whitcomb? Her eyes darted to his, then away. I haven't heard that name in years. But you know it. And you knew him. Yes. Briefly. Before the scandal. He was brilliant, just not ruthless enough. Edgar accused him of stealing a patent, and Alfred was ruined. You believe it was a false accusation? I don't know, she whispered. But Edgar never allowed dissent. He prized loyalty more than truth. Poirot tapped his cane against the tiled floor. You were his assistant for 20 years. Yet you inherited nothing. Beatrice stiffened. He once told me I was the only one he trusted. And yet he never made it official. Unless, Poirot said gently, someone destroyed the document before it could be found. She didn't answer. The solicitor, Mr. Ewan Mallory, arrived shortly before tea. He was pale, with parchment hands and a voice like a crisp envelope being opened. Poirot met with him in the library, where the scent of cedar mixed with the ink of old wills. I understand you handled Edgar Marston's estate, Poirot said. Yes, a complex arrangement. But he left a sealed document, to be opened only upon his death. And it was opened. This morning. The instructions were unusual. Poirot leaned in slightly. He named 3 equal beneficiaries, Miss Vera Marston, Miss Beatrice Wells, and Mr. Daniel Leon. But, Mallory added, there was a clause, should any of them predecease him, or be convicted of causing his death, their share is to be divided between the remaining 2. Poirot raised his brows. Ah! The stakes are not merely inheritance, but exclusion. Precisely. And no mention of Alfred Whitcomb. The solicitor blinked. None. He was excised from Marston's affairs decades ago. Yet Marston kept a sketch of the man's design. Mallory looked unsettled. That is not in the official record. Poirot smiled faintly. No. But time, monsieur, leaves clues in the shadows. Later that evening, Poirot dined alone in the breakfast room, a light soup and brioche before him, untouched. He was not thinking of food. He was thinking of the ribbon again, the one soaked in copper compound, found on Marston's wrist. Copper sulfate, a compound found in clock restoration materials, but also in textile preservation. Only someone who understood such mixtures, or had handled them before, would choose it, and who had access to both clocks and fine fabrics. Poirot reached into his coat pocket and retrieved the inventory list he had quietly taken from the workshop earlier. Near the bottom, number 217, gilded timepiece with silk bow and mirrored dial. Gift for A.W., 1911. There it was again. A.W. Not Alfred Whitcomb. Not Anna Wells. But someone else. At 9 o'clock sharp, Poirot requested Vera Marston join him in the music room. She arrived in a fitted navy dress, elegant and cold. He gestured for her to sit. "Miss Marston, you were born in 1912, were you not?" "Yes." "And your mother?" "She died when I was 12. Poirot's voice was quiet. "Was her name Anne?" Vera flinched. "What?" Poirot unfolded a page from the estate log. Edgar once gave a clock to someone named A.W. in 1911. A gift, listed in personal ledgers, yet erased from the family records. That suggests something unspoken. Vera stood slowly. "You think he was in love with my mother?" Poirot looked up. "I think she was more than a love. She may have been the mother of his child." Vera's lips parted, but no sound came. "You were raised as his niece. But Edgar Marston had no siblings. Your birth certificate was altered after your mother's death. A child born from a scandal, perhaps? A secret too delicate for his reputation." "You don't know that." Poirot said nothing, only waited. Finally, Vera's voice broke. "He told me once, when I was 15. He said I was the only thing he had ever created that he feared losing." "Then the will makes sense," Poirot replied. "He left you a share because he could never acknowledge you publicly. The velvet ribbon was not for you. It was for someone he feared. Beatrice. Possibly. Or Leon. Or both. Whoever discovered the truth, perhaps used it to silence him." That night, Poirot stood before the long case clock once more. He pressed his hand against the side and found the hidden compartment. It clicked open gently. Inside was a second letter, dated just 3 days before Edgar's death. To Beatrice, "The past cannot be measured in hours, but it can be revealed in seconds. I know now who betrayed me. The clock-marked eclipse hides the original schematics. They prove what I accused Whitcomb of, and what you confirmed. You protected him. You pitied him. And you lied to me. I am not angry, only disappointed. But know this, I will revise my will tonight. And should I die before it is read, let the velvet hour strike you." Poirot's eyes narrowed. He now knew who had motive. He now knew who feared a rewritten will. But not yet how it had been done. That would come soon. And so, with care, Poirot folded the letter and returned it to the velvet case in his pocket. Tomorrow, he would call everyone together. For the curtain on deception was rising. And time was almost up. Chapter 5. The Final Adjustment. The morning mist clung low to the gardens of Marston Hall, reluctant to lift. It was the kind of silence that preceded a reckoning, brittle, listening. Hercule Poirot stood at the window of the study, watching the dew evaporate from the sundial. It was 9 o'clock. Not yet the velvet hour. But it was time. Behind him, laid neatly on the oak desk, were 3 items: a velvet ribbon, a clockmaker's oil brush, and a small vial containing remnants of copper sulfate, now identified with certainty. Poirot turned, stepped forward, and lifted a piece of parchment from the tray. The ink was faint, but legible: Testament, revised draft, dated the very night of Edgar Marston's death. Unwitnessed, undelivered. But it changed everything. In this version, Daniel Leon was removed from the will. The reason? Compromised dealings with an expelled former partner. Whitcomb again. The shadowy name was starting to take shape. Poirot moved deliberately toward the workshop. Inside, the scent of brass filings and lacquer still hung in the air. Clocks ticked faintly from the walls, like a chorus breathing in unison. Poirot's eyes moved with a surgeon's precision. There, Beneath a green velvet cloth lay the number 217 timepiece. The gift clock. The one Edgar had once dedicated to A.W., not Alfred Whitcomb, but perhaps Anna Wells, Vera's mother. It was beautiful, round-faced, gold-rimmed, the dial backed by black mirror glass, and a satin bow curled into the winding key. But something was wrong. Poirot reached for the magnifying lens and examined the bow. Threaded between its folds, nearly invisible to the naked eye, was a hair-fine wire, copper-colored and taut. It ran from the winding key to a hidden groove along the edge. Poirot's brow lowered. Not decorative. Not accidental. Deliberate. With gloved hands, he rotated the face. A whisper click. A false panel. Inside, a tiny brass vial, empty now, but rimmed with faint traces of the same copper sulfate compound. The mechanism had been re-engineered, not to chime, but to release a vapor. Poirot stood back. He could now see the outline of the plan. Ingenious. Vicious. At precisely 10 o'clock, Poirot summoned all three primary heirs to the drawing room. Vera Marston entered first, her face composed, but her eyes weary. Beatrice Wells followed, hesitant and grave. Then Daniel Leon arrived, arms folded, posture defensive. Poirot did not speak at once. He merely walked to the mantelpiece and laid the altered clock upon the surface. A work of beauty, n'est-ce pas, he said softly. And yet, a work of murder. They stared. Edgar Marston's death was not by stroke. Not natural. No, it was engineered, down to the second. He turned to face them. This clock was altered to release a mist, a highly concentrated vapor from copper sulfate and an unknown additive. Inhaled over time, it would cause disorientation, then respiratory distress. Quiet, untraceable, but fatal. It required one thing, close proximity. Beatrice stepped forward, but he kept that clock on his mantle for years. Ah, Poirot said, raising a finger. But the mist was released only after it was adjusted. Someone accessed it the day before his death. The internal seals were fresh. You, Miss Wells, catalogued the maintenance logs. Yet there is no entry. Beatrice's face paled. I didn't. You had opportunity. You knew the clock intimately. But it is not only you who had motive. He turned to Leon. You had reason to fear your removal from the will. Edgar had uncovered your link to Whitcomb. A clandestine business deal, yes. Leon's lips tightened. We spoke once. That's all. Decades ago. But your correspondence was not destroyed. Edgar kept everything. And he knew you would try to cover your tracks. Poirot walked slowly to the center of the room. There is more. The velvet ribbon was tied around Edgar's wrist post-mortem. It was a message, not from the killer, but meant for them. Edgar knew what was happening. He may have discovered the tampering, but too late. A silence held. Then Poirot spoke the final piece. But the true key was not the inheritance. Not revenge. It was guilt. He turned, suddenly, to Beatrice Wells. You protected Whitcomb all those years ago. Lied for him. Out of sympathy. Out of love. Perhaps. Edgar forgave you. Once. But not again. You feared your betrayal would be uncovered. That your loyalty to the wrong man would undo you. And when you discovered Edgar had changed his will, erasing Leon, but preparing to name only Vera, you panicked. Beatrice trembled. I didn't know. You did. You saw the document. Or perhaps only its envelope. You believed he was going to remove you. In truth, he had meant to honor you. But too late. So you acted. Poirot reached into his pocket and withdrew the velvet ribbon. You cut a piece from the old repair kit. dipped it in the very solution used to coat antique mechanisms, copper sulfate. Then you tied it to his wrist as a parting message, a warning, or a lament. Beatrice stared at the ribbon as though it might speak. "No," she said quietly. "I didn't kill him." Poirot's voice softened. "No, mademoiselle. But you knew. You saw the altered clock. You realized what had been done. And you said nothing, because it would incriminate the man you once loved." She looked up suddenly. "You mean Daniel?" Poirot turned. "Yes, Monsieur Léon. You knew Edgar was about to cut you out. You feared exposure. You knew the chemicals. You had studied horology. And you were the last to leave his workshop that day." Léon's expression darkened. "You can't prove that." "I can," Poirot said, pulling out a small slip of paper. "Your fingerprints were found inside the vial. Not recent, perhaps wiped after the fact. But enough remained. The mist was timed. You wanted him to die slowly, in private, and appear to have succumbed naturally. The ribbon frightened you. You believed Edgar had discovered your plot. So you removed the clock before the police arrived." Silence fell like dust. Vera stood still, unmoving, her hands curled tightly at her sides. Beatrice began to sob, not from guilt, but from grief. And Léon, Daniel Léon, stepped back, then slumped into the armchair. "So what now?" he asked. "Arrest." Poirot gave a quiet nod. "The constables are already on their way. And the velvet hour has struck." Chapter 6. The Velvet Hour Revisited. The drawing room had emptied. Only Poirot remained. Outside, the sky wore its early twilight robe, neither day nor night, a delicate hush between the ticking of hours. The velvet hour. But this time, Poirot did not linger to romanticize the phrase. Instead, he sat quietly, his fingertips pressed together, eyes turned inward. The case, by all appearances, was closed. Daniel Léon, now in custody, had confessed. Partially. He admitted to altering the antique clock, though he claimed he had only meant to scare Edgar, to frighten him into silence or compromise. But the mechanism had gone too far, he said. The mist had acted faster than expected. A miscalculation. Poirot did not believe that. One does not engineer a device over days, apply chemicals, tamper with gears and vials, and then claim impulsiveness. None. That was planning. Not panic. Still, the truth, or one version of it, had surfaced. But as Poirot stared at the old grandfather clock in the hallway, watching its polished pendulum swing with solemn purpose, a whisper of doubt crept into his mind. The kind he never dismissed. Because one thing still troubled him. He stood and walked slowly back to the study. It was there, alone once more, that he examined the draft of the revised will. The parchment had been genuine. The ink, faint but unaltered. Edgar had written it shortly before his death. Poirot had no doubt. But the language was curious. Too abrupt. Too unlike Edgar's style. And then, a second detail emerged. The velvet ribbon, the one Beatrice had been accused of tying to Edgar's wrist. It was not soaked in copper sulfate, as Poirot had stated aloud. That had been a fabrication, intended to provoke a reaction. The ribbon bore no chemical trace at all. And yet Beatrice had not denied it. She had, in fact, seemed wounded by its mention, struck, even. Which meant, she had seen it before. Poirot pulled open the drawer beside Edgar's desk and extracted a thin bundle of letters, the correspondence he had earlier withheld from the constables. They were addressed to A.W., carefully tied with a faded blue thread. Anna Wells. Vera's mother. Edgar's first love. His sister-in-law. Poirot read again the final letter in the series, dated nearly 30 years prior. In it, Edgar confessed that despite everything, he still wore the ribbon Anna had given him. He kept it in the clock she'd admired, tucked beside the winding key. The velvet hour was, to him, the memory of her. A phrase repeated throughout, "At the velvet hour, I remember her. Always." Poirot placed the letter gently on the desk. It was now clear. The ribbon on Edgar's wrist had not been a warning from the killer, nor a parting message by Beatrice, nor a misdirection from Leon. It had been tied there by Edgar himself. He had known he was dying. Whether he recognized the cause or merely felt his strength failing, Edgar Marston had chosen to compose himself with the grace and ritual of his younger years. He wound the old clock, the one connected to Anna, and tied the ribbon around his wrist. Not in fear, but in remembrance. The velvet hour was not the hour of murder. It was the hour of grief, of memory, of love, preserved in silence. Poirot stared at the clock once more. The altered mechanism, yes, had been engineered to harm. But whether it succeeded alone, or merely hastened the inevitable, was not yet certain. There was still one missing piece. The door creaked open softly behind him. Vera stood in the frame, her expression unreadable. "I thought you had left," she said. Poirot gave a slight smile. "None. I remain, always, until the last tick of the case." She stepped forward, eyes resting briefly on the ribbon. "I didn't want it to end like this," she murmured. "Daniel, Beatrice, they were like family. But I suppose every family has rot somewhere, buried deep." Poirot watched her closely. "You knew about the will?" he asked. She hesitated. "I suspected. Father had been distant, protective of Beatrice. But he confided less in recent months." Poirot nodded. "And yet," he said gently, "you stood to gain the most, should both Leon and Miss Wells be removed from the will." Vera's eyes narrowed faintly. "Are you suggesting?" "I suggest nothing, mademoiselle. I observe." He gestured to the parchment on the desk. "This version of the will, it removes Leon. But it retains Miss Wells. Yet in the final executed draft, never found, you alone were named. You discovered this, perhaps, before his death." She remained silent. Poirot continued. "The document we found may not have been Edgar's last draft at all. You knew about his ritual, the clock, the ribbon, the hour. And you used it. You tampered with the original ribbon, replacing it with another. You planted it on his wrist post-mortem. You made it appear he had chosen it." Vera said nothing. Her fingers gripped the chair back. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. "Tell me, mademoiselle, what else did you replace that night?" Her lips trembled. Then, quite suddenly, a quiet sigh escaped her. Not panic. Not confession. Just release. "I was tired," she said at last. "Tired of waiting. Tired of everyone else being more deserving. I loved him. Truly. But I couldn't watch him give it all to people who used him." Poirot lowered his head. "Mademoiselle Vera," he said softly, "you did not kill him with poison, nor mechanism. But your fingerprints were on the pages, on the final pages of his life. And so it was that the velvet hour returned once more, not as a time of death, but as a portrait of choices. In the end, there had been two murderers, one who altered a clock, and another who altered a legacy. Edgar Marston had died between them, surrounded by shadows, embraced by remembrance. And Hercule Poirot, standing at the threshold of night, understood finally what it meant. That sometimes, the truth was not in how a man had died, but in how he had chosen to say goodbye. Chapter 7. A Legacy in Smoke. Poirot sat beside the fireplace in the Marston library, his hands folded neatly, his eyes fixed upon the flickering embers. Outside, the evening had deepened into that thick, purple-blue hush that blanketed the countryside just before midnight. The grand house had grown quiet, except for the rhythmic patter of rain upon the tall windows. Inspector Barrow entered the room stiffly, accompanied by Constable Rowan. Behind them trailed Beatrice Wells, eyes red but composed, and Daniel Leon, pale and silent, flanked by another officer. Lastly came Vera Marston, her expression schooled into a fragile calm. They stood in a semicircle, all eyes on Poirot. "You've asked us to return, Monsieur Poirot," said Barrow. "Though I assumed we had our man already in Mr. Leon." Poirot gave a slight nod. "Ah, but to assume, mon ami, is to risk stepping on the truth and crushing it underfoot." He rose slowly and took a step forward. The warmth from the fire did not touch the chill in his voice. "I summoned you all because this case, Ms. Amos, is not one of mere mechanics. This is not simply a matter of chemicals, a tampered clock, or an inheritance. It is, and always has been, about timing and intentions." Barrow frowned. "We have a confession from Leon." "No," Poirot interrupted. "You have an admission of tampering, not a confession of murder." Leon stiffened, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to kill him. I swear it." "And yet," Poirot said, his gaze sharp, "someone else did. Someone who knew about the altered mechanism, and timed Edgar's death to match it." Vera took a step back. Beatrice looked up, eyes widening. Poirot walked to the clock in the hallway, the old grandfather that had stood silent witness to Edgar Marston's final hour. "This device," he said, "was indeed rigged. Mr. Leon modified the internal system, intending to frighten Mr. Marston. Perhaps to hasten a return of his investment. Perhaps out of desperation. But the chemical release, the mist, it was slow. Too slow to kill in the time frame we were led to believe." Barrow blinked. "You're saying it didn't kill him?" "Non," said Poirot. "I am saying it weakened him. But Edgar Marston did not die from gas alone." He turned back to the group. "He died from a powerful cardiac stimulant introduced into his tea, a substance that, when ingested by someone already suffering from an undiagnosed heart condition and weakened by the mist, would result in near-instant cardiac failure. The tea was poured not by Mr. Leon, but by Vera Marston." All heads turned. Vera went still. "That's absurd," she said softly. "I brought him tea every night." "OUI," said Poirot, "and last night, you ensured it would be his last. You added a compound, perhaps digitoxin, perhaps something more refined, to his cup, knowing that the altered clock would mask the true cause of death. You hoped that Mr. Leon's sabotage would take the blame. And it nearly did." "I had no reason to kill him," Vera whispered. "You had every reason," Poirot said, voice rising. "You knew he was rewriting his will, that he intended to include Beatrice. You had seen the draft. But that was not the only reason. There was something more personal, more emotional, something that stung more deeply than money." Poirot reached into his pocket and removed a small envelope, the final letter Edgar had written to Anna Wells, Vera's mother. He unfolded it and read, "At the velvet hour, I remember her. Always. If only she had been mine. What a life we might have had. But I suppose Vera will never understand. She was born of duty, not desire." Vera turned pale. "You found the letters," Poirot said, "and you understood then, for the first time, the depth of his love for your mother. You were never truly the daughter of his heart, only the remnant of his guilt." Silence. Poirot stepped closer. "You loved him, devoted yourself to him, built your life around the promise that you were the one person he truly valued. And then, in the end, you discovered you were not even his chosen heir." Vera's face twisted, not in anger, but in pain. He was going to give it all away. To her, she said, nodding toward Beatrice. To some girl he barely knew. Poirot's voice softened. So you acted. You poisoned the tea and staged the hour of death to align with the clock. You tied the velvet ribbon not out of sentiment, but to throw suspicion elsewhere. But there was one thing you could not control. He turned to Beatrice. You saw the ribbon before. Not recently, but in a photograph your mother once showed you. You recognized it as Anna's, and told me so, without realizing the significance. Beatrice gasped. Vera said nothing. Poirot nodded solemnly to Barrow. I believe you will find remnants of the poison in the teapot, and on the lace handkerchief she used to handle the cup. Barrow hesitated, and then gave a silent nod to his constable. Rowan stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Vera's arm. She did not resist. As she was led away, she spoke only once, barely above a whisper. I just wanted him to see me. Poirot closed his eyes. Later, as the fire dwindled to ash, Barrow sat across from Poirot. Well, he muttered, that's not what I expected. 2 culprits, neither one entirely innocent, and a death born of love and legacy. Poirot sipped his tisane. There is no such thing as a tidy death, Inspector, he said. Only tidy lies. And they unravel, always, when one asks not how someone died, but why someone might wish them gone. Barrow gave a grunt of grudging respect. I'll say this, Monsieur Poirot. You've a strange way of looking at things, but thank God you do. Poirot smiled faintly. Merci. It is, as always, the duty of the little grey cells. Chapter 8. The Last Testament. The storm had passed. Dawn was a hesitant grey wash over the hills, touching the edges of the Marston estate with the softness of a brushstroke left unfinished. The manor, now hushed and still, seemed to exhale after the night's revelations, the way a house might once the truth had been spoken aloud. Poirot lingered in the study, his suitcase packed but still resting near the door. He had not yet departed. Barrow had taken Vera into custody without incident. The clock had been secured, the teapot bagged for analysis. Beatrice had retired to her room in a kind of stunned silence, while Leon, no longer a murderer but still a man with much to account for, remained behind to wait for the consequences of his actions. Poirot had requested one final hour alone in the library. Not for reasons of deduction. No, the facts were now laid bare. But there remained one unopened envelope on the desk. It bore no address. Only a name written in heavy, slanted ink, myself. Poirot sat down gently before it. The fire had burned down to soft orange coals, the silence of the room broken only by the faint creak of the wind nudging the high windows. He hesitated, then opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter, the edges worn, as if it had been opened and resealed more than once. The handwriting was Edgar Marston's. But unlike the other letters, the ones to Anna Wells, to Vera, and even the new draft of his will, this one felt entirely different. It was not addressed to anyone. It was a confession. I have spent my life surrounded by legacy, portraits, property, profit. But not people. Or not the right ones, at least. When Anna left, it took something vital with her. I married Vera's mother out of decorum, not desire. I stayed behind the hedges of this grand house while time peeled my convictions away. And now, at the velvet hour, that strange hour just before sleep, when regrets visit like ghosts, I wonder what I have truly left behind. To Vera, I gave duty. To Beatrice, a faint echo of love I never knew how to express. And to Daniel Leon, even to him I showed a mirror of my younger ambition. But what none of them saw, because I never let them, was the man beneath the gentleman. A man afraid of what he had become, and ashamed of what he had not. Perhaps no one will ever read this. Perhaps that is best. But if I could rewrite it all, I would burn the velvet and choose something simpler. Something real. Not the stage curtain of legacy, but the plain fabric of love. Poirot folded the paper slowly and placed it back inside the envelope. He closed his eyes for a moment, not in sleep, but in reverence. There was a melancholy in Edgar Marston that even death had not extinguished. A man who had written his own epitaph without realizing it. He rose and crossed the room to the old clock, the device that had once been a weapon, then a riddle, and now simply a shell. It stood tall, unmoving. Poirot touched the glass face gently. The hands pointed to midnight, still. The hour of death. Or perhaps, the hour of revelation. Later that morning, Beatrice Wells found Poirot standing on the front drive, suitcase in hand, gazing toward the far hills where the mist had finally lifted. "May I speak with you?" she asked softly. Poirot turned, offering a slight bow. "Of course, mademoiselle." She approached, her eyes tired but dry. "I didn't know he was my father. Not until the letters. I thought, perhaps he knew about me all along and chose to stay away. But now I don't know what to believe." Poirot studied her a moment. "He did know," he said quietly. "Your mother told him." But Edgar Marston was a man of great hesitation. He feared scandal. He feared what others might say. And in doing so, he lost the chance to love you openly. She looked away, her jaw trembling. "He left something for you," Poirot continued, withdrawing a folded document from inside his coat. A codicil to his will, unsigned, but witnessed. He intended to finalize it. It named you as beneficiary of part of his estate. Not out of guilt, I think, but as a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. A belated offering. Beatrice took the paper slowly. "Will that hold up legally?" "That is for the courts to decide," Poirot said. "But in truth, it is the symbol that matters more. You were never invisible, only overlooked." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "And Vera?" she finally asked. "She will face justice. But remember, mademoiselle, she was not a monster. Only a woman broken by misbelief, who mistook rejection for betrayal." Beatrice stood in silence for a long moment. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said. Poirot inclined his head. "It has been my honor." As she turned to go, Poirot looked once more to the far horizon. A carriage soon arrived to take him to the station. As it pulled away, Poirot glanced back at the house, not for its grandeur, nor its secrets, but for the people within. In every case, there are two mysteries, he mused, the one of facts and the one of feelings. The former had been solved. The latter, perhaps, never fully could be. But in this case, Poirot had come close. And that, for him, was enough. Chapter 9. Smoke and Silver. London always seemed to Poirot both too fast and too grey after time spent in the countryside. It moved with urgency, but lacked poetry. The carriages clattered with indifference, and even the fog, that omnipresent London fog, seemed less mysterious here, more practical, more suit than spirit. Yet it was in London where cases often ended. Not with a bang or a cry, but with the quiet rustling of papers, the clink of a teacup, and the sigh of memory. Poirot sat once again in his apartment on Whitehaven Mansions, alone save for the muted ticking of the small ormolu clock on the mantel. It was nearly 5 in the afternoon, the hour for tisane. But today, instead, he poured himself a rare cup of black Darjeeling, as though marking a departure from habit. The case was closed. Vera Marston had confessed, though with a pride that refused the word murder. To her, it had been justice. That sentiment would not sit well in the courts. Inspector Barrow, ever the man of procedure, had already prepared the statement for Scotland Yard. Leon had stepped forward with his own roll, turning over the altered will and admitting his forged assurances. He would likely be spared prison, barely, but not disgrace. Poirot had declined accolades. He had not solved the case for glory. This had been a puzzle with blood on the velvet, a killing wrapped in sorrow rather than cunning. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He rose, curious. He expected no visitors. Upon opening the door, Poirot was met by a woman he did not recognize immediately. She was in her late 50s, modestly dressed, yet there was a dignity to her posture that suggested self-possession, not servitude. Her hat was of good taste but well worn. Her coat, simple but clean. "Monsieur Poirot," she asked. "Oh, you have come for?" "I am Anna Wells." Poirot stood straighter. She gave a small smile. "You know the name." "I do," he said gently, and stepped aside. "Please, come in." They sat by the window, the tea service between them, untouched. "I received word," she said after a moment. "Not from Edgar, of course. Not directly. But when news of the estate scandal reached me, I knew I had to come." Poirot inclined his head. "He wrote to you?" She nodded. "A month ago. He said he regretted many things. That he never stopped thinking of the life we could have had. That he wanted to see me again. I hadn't answered yet. I didn't know how. Now I never shall." Her voice did not crack, but Poirot could hear the careful restraint in every word, the trained silence of someone used to swallowing feelings whole. She reached into her handbag and removed a worn envelope. "This is what he sent me." Poirot unfolded the letter with slow reverence. It was short. "Anna, all these years I've worn a mask that matched the wallpaper. I am tired of it. If you would speak to me, even once, I would like to tell you what I should have told you years ago, that I never stopped believing we were real. E." Anna took the letter back with a sigh. "He never mailed letters like that before," she said. "Always so measured. So correct. But this was the man I loved. Still buried in there, under all the silver and smoke." Poirot nodded. "He never stopped loving you. He merely stopped believing he could deserve you." She looked out the window, toward the wintered streets. "Do you think he found peace at the end?" Poirot thought of the letter Edgar had written to himself, the last testament no one was meant to read. The regrets laid bare, the longing confessed not to another, but to the quiet of his own conscience. "Yes," Poirot said softly. "I believe, in his final hours, he was at last honest. And that honesty is a kind of peace." Anna remained quiet for a while. Then she looked back at Poirot with clear eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for helping the truth come out, however bitter it might be." Poirot bowed his head. "Truth, madam, is rarely sweet, but it is always just." That evening, Poirot took a walk through Hyde Park, his cane tapping gently along the gravel path. The cold wind lifted the tails of his coat, and the sky had turned the color of pewter. He did not enjoy sentimentality, but reflection, that he allowed himself. He thought of Vera Marston, cradling bitterness like an heirloom. He thought of Leon, running from shadows of failure he helped create. He thought of Beatrice, standing in the great hall with her father's unsigned letter in hand, a legacy half acknowledged. And he thought of Edgar Marston, who had once loved and lost, and in trying to protect a name, had neglected the hearts beating around it. A murder had been solved. Yes, but more than that, lives had been uncovered, layer by painful layer, until the truth beneath could no longer be ignored. Poirot reached the bench near the fountain and sat down. He removed a handkerchief and dusted a speck from his glove. The world would move on. Society would forget the name Marston soon enough. But Poirot would remember. Not the velvet clock. Not the will. But the final moment of a man alone, writing to himself, and finally daring to admit what he had never said aloud. Therein lay the true mystery. And its answer. Chapter 10. The Velvet Hour. It was just past 7 when Poirot returned to Whitehaven Mansions. The London skyline was smeared in hues of copper and indigo, the lamplight flickering to life like old memories trying not to fade. The city's din was distant, a low murmur beneath the ticking of his mind. He hung his coat with care, straightened the umbrella stand, always just slightly misaligned, and lit the single reading lamp in the corner. On the table lay the last unopened envelope from the Marston estate. Beatrice had sent it that morning with a note that said simply, "He meant for you to have this, Monsieur Poirot. We found it in his study drawer, sealed. I believe you'll understand why." Poirot hesitated only briefly before opening it. Inside was a single photograph and a torn scrap of fine paper. The photograph was yellowing but preserved, a candid moment of Edgar Marston, perhaps in his 30s, seated at a garden table. Across from him, a woman with clever eyes and a wistful smile. Anna Wells. On the back, in Edgar's handwriting, "The only hour I truly lived." Poirot laid the photo aside and turned to the scrap of paper. It bore no more than 6 handwritten words. "Return it when the hour passes." It made no sense at first. But then Poirot remembered. Weeks earlier, in the Marston drawing room, Poirot had studied the velvet-paneled wall behind the grandfather clock, the so-called velvet hour, as Vera had once called it. A strange thing, velvet on a clock face. He had assumed it symbolic, perhaps romantic. But Poirot never truly dismissed anything. Now, with purpose renewed, he took out his small black notebook, flipped to a page near the center, and under the heading Velvet Hour, Suspect Symbolism, he'd written, "Possible hidden mechanism. Irregular ticking from 6:55 to 7:05 p.m. It had slipped his priority during the tension of murder and confession. Now he understood. 3 days later, Poirot returned to Marston Hall. Beatrice was still there, sorting through her father's effects. He requested 5 minutes alone in the drawing room, no more. She nodded, leaving him with a distant curiosity and a daughter's quiet exhaustion. Poirot approached the grandfather clock. It was nearly 7. He waited. At exactly 7 p.m., the tick shifted, softer, almost musical. Poirot's fingers moved to the velvet square in the wall behind the clock. He pressed. There was a click. A compartment swung open, not large, but deliberate. Inside, perfectly preserved, lay a letter sealed with black wax. And beneath it, a brooch, a small, simple pin of silver leaves with a velvet backing. The letter read, "To the one who waits. If you are reading this, I am gone. I created this clock in a moment of longing, not genius. For a single hour every evening, I allowed myself to remember, to mourn, to pretend. This was my hour of velvet. Return the brooch to her, if she still lives, or to the garden where I asked her to marry me, beneath the weeping elm. The hour ends, and so must I. Edgar Marston." Poirot read it twice. Then gently, he folded the brooch in a handkerchief, tucked the letter beneath it, and closed the compartment. The clock resumed its ordinary tick. The velvet hour was over. Back in London, Poirot wrote to Anna Wells. He did not include the brooch. Instead, he described it in detail and offered her the choice. "It is yours, madam, should you wish it returned. Or I shall bury it beneath the elm, as per his wish. Both are acts of memory. You need not decide today." She never wrote back. But a week later, Poirot received a parcel. Inside, a single pressed elm leaf. And nothing else. He understood. In the weeks that followed, Poirot observed how quiet the world becomes after a mystery ends. There is no applause, no trumpet. Life does not resume, it simply continues. Inspector Barrow's case closed without flair. Vera Marston pleaded guilty, but with conditions. Her confession, being partial and complicated, resulted in manslaughter charges, not murder. She would serve time, but not a lifetime. Leon's reputation collapsed. His business ties severed. Beatrice quietly bought him out of the family trust, her inheritance cut, but her dignity preserved. Of the others, little was heard. The scandal moved from headlines to gossip, from gossip to silence. Only Poirot remembered everything: the glances, the lies, the velvet. One evening, Hastings returned from abroad and found Poirot deep in thought. "My dear fellow," he said, hanging up his coat, "you look as if you've just stepped out of a tragic play. Was it another case?" Poirot did not answer at once. Then, very gently, "Non, Hastings. Not a case. A life. One too carefully managed." "You mean someone regretted something?" "Everyone regretted something, mon ami," Poirot said. "And one man built a monument to the regret." "Sounds like a haunted house." "No," Poirot said, folding his hands. "It was merely a house with velvet on its clock." That night, as the final light left the sky, Poirot sat by the window, a cup of tisane untouched in his hand. He thought not of guilt, not of clever lies, but of the velvet hour, that soft, secret span of time between fact and feeling, when what was lost could be imagined again, just long enough to feel it once more before letting it go. It was not justice he felt tonight, nor triumph, only a very quiet sort of peace. And so, another mystery is laid to rest. The lies unraveled, the masks lifted, and the truth, however strange or sorrowful, brought into the light. If you stayed with me till the end, thank you. It means more than you know. These stories aren't just puzzles. They're reflections of what we hide, what we fear, and what we dare to reveal. If you enjoyed this tale, please don't forget to give it a like, and more importantly, subscribe. Help this channel grow, and together, we'll keep uncovering the secrets that lie just beneath the surface. Drop a comment below if you like this mystery. I read every single one of them. Until next time, goodbye.